Hello, everyone. It's Philippe again, and welcome to another episode of the Eden Talent podcast. As you know, this is a series of interviews with builders, creators, and innovators. Um, Most of them and often go unnoticed by the general public, either because they prefer to build in silence, because they prefer to let their achievements speak for themselves, or just because they're doing it for fun and not for the fame. Today, I'm really excited about our guest, Kinsey Grant. Kinsey is, like most of our guests, like a lot of things. So a podcast host, journalist, content creator, founder. So a lot of things we can cover today. Hello, Kinsey. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation and being part of the Hidden Talent podcast. And as always, let's just try to give our listeners a quick kind of brief introduction to what Kinsey Grant is. So what words come to mind when you think of yourself or you try to describe yourself to other people?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I love starting off with this question instead of read me your resume, because I'm a big proponent of trying to create personhood outside of just what it says on our LinkedIn profiles. So I appreciate you starting with this. I think if I had to boil it down to a handful of words that would describe who I am and who I've become, especially over the last couple of years, I think curious is certainly an attribute I would assign to myself. I'm also somebody who is evolving a lot. I have changed a ton over the last several years of my life. Goofy, I am often described as goofy by professors, by people who have known me, by my family. But that's kind of just the high level stuff. When it gets down to a little bit more of the nitty gritty, my professional career, especially, I would say that it's willing to change, hardworking, things like that, trying to be a self-starter as much as possible, as motivated as possible. But I think that curious and evolving and goofy are probably the most important character traits if you want to know who I really am.
Yeah, I can already kind of paint a picture. Goofy is a very interesting one to try to understand a little bit better, because of course for me it's a very positive thing, and I think what it represents is kind of like openness, not being afraid of kind of making kind of a fool of yourself because you're experimenting new stuff. So, but yeah, what does it mean for you? Or
yeah, it's a lot of that. I think there's also a certain element of honesty when you can allow yourself to just be who you are when you're hanging out with your friends or your family in a professional setting as well. That transparency has been a really big part of the work that I do, because I find, especially in the startup world, in the media world, in entrepreneurship, so many people are taking themselves so seriously. And I often find myself asking why. People are people. Let's just be who we are when we take ourselves to work as well. It's unrealistic to expect that you're going to be totally transparent and 100% yourself in all settings. But I think that if we can allow ourselves to feel more comfortable just being who we are while we're also making money and doing our jobs, then the world will be a better place. My actual personality is pretty optimistic and pretty goofy, and I don't really take myself that seriously in my personal life. So why should I, apply some different kind of personality just because I'm sitting in front of a microphone recording a podcast? So to me, a lot of it just has to do with trying to be as comfortable as you can be being yourself in front of people. I think that's really important. And I wish I saw more of it in the world around me.
Yeah, I was just thinking about kind of the comparison between goofy and professional that you mentioned, because professional, as I see it, it just means that you're taking your work very seriously, that you're kind of so you're kind of responsible and committed. But there's also the other kind of meaning of word professional, which is the opposite of goofy. So it's like you're just serious. you don't smile. You just make what's expected of you. You're very compliant. So that's kind of another word, kind of meaning for the word professional. I think it symbolizes also kind of this mismatch between what work and careers meant probably for kind of previous generation, what it means nowadays for millennials and Gen Z. And I think we'll dive deeper into that when comparing kind of traditional journalism and kind of modern day storytelling. But we'll go there in a minute. Let's start from the beginning. Tell us a bit, kind of, where did you kind of grew up? What kind of from your upbringing kind of affected who you are as a professional and some of the decisions you made, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure. So I grew up in a pretty small town in Florida. It's the capital city, Tallahassee, but very small. I went to the same school from pre-K until I graduated and went to college. And so for most of my life so far, for the first 18 years of my life, I spent all of those years in a very homogenous kind of setting. I didn't really see a lot of the world. I didn't really understand a lot of the world, but I had this family that was so, and I still do, is so dedicated to sharing ideas and having conversations that are more than just surface level. I remember some of my fondest memories of my childhood were spent sitting around the dinner table with my sister and my mom and my dad, talking about big political, geopolitical, cultural, any kind of issue, any kind of big headline or story. My parents really encouraged my sister and me to develop our own ideas about what was going on in the world around us, despite the fact that we did live in this town where everybody kind of looked and thought and acted the same way. And I'm really grateful for that. I think that had a huge impact on who I am today. On a lot of issues, I could not be farther from where my parents stand, especially when it comes to politics. But I am lucky in that they have encouraged me to pursue whatever my own ideas are, despite the fact that they're very different from their own. And I think that is really at the core of what I ended up studying in college and what I've ended up doing today, which is just trying to better grasp the world around me and to distill that information in a sensible and an understandable way for other people. That to me is at the core of journalism, but also at the core of the storytelling that I'm doing now, the podcasting that I'm doing now, the interviews that I'm doing now. The effort for me has always been an effort toward trying to make sense of the world that is very confusing all around us all the time. And so that's why I wanted to study journalism from a very young age. Every kid always wants to be a veterinarian when they're young. I feel like it's kind of a trope at this point, but I wanted to be a vet until I realized that most of being a vet is just like putting dogs to sleep, which is super depressing, and decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And I think by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I actually was the anchor for my lower school. So I was in 5th grade, probably like 9 or 10 years old, the anchor for my school's TV news program. Every Friday, they would do like a recorded TV news program. And I was the anchor for that. And that kind of just set me on a path toward this idea of what storytelling could become that I have still not gotten off of, which is super exciting. After I did all of my, school newspaper and the yearbook and the magazines and like all of that good stuff in high school, went to college and studied business journalism. I initially thought that I was going to go into political reporting. I started college as a politics and a journalism major, but spent a summer in DC. Didn't love it. Didn't really jive at all with the politics stuff. Again, kind of like becoming a vet. It was so depressing. It was frustrating. It felt like you were banging your head against a wall most of the time. And so I took a class that was called Reporting on Business my junior year of college. And I just loved it. I felt like I had finally found what I was supposed to be writing about and what I was supposed to be talking about. And I think that that experience was especially tangible and important for my own personal story because I was reporting on business, quote unquote, if you will, in a very small town. Where I went to college was 7,000 people, including the student population. So it was a very small town, but you could still see how something like the Federal Reserve's decision to change interest rates was impacting people in that very small town in the middle of nowhere in Virginia. And I saw that impact firsthand. And I got to tell the stories of local businesses and small businesses and city councils. And that to me was just this incredible experience of, these headlines that seem so abstract for so much of my life are actually not abstract at all. They are specifically impacting people on a very personal level. And so I decided to stick with it. When I graduated college, I became a stock market reporter. And that was a fantastic experience, certainly very different from what I'm doing right now. I was mostly covering breaking news. My office was right across from the New York Stock Exchange. I could see it from my desk. And that was a great place to kind of cut my teeth and understand the world around me a little bit better. But eventually wanted to get more in depth in the storytelling aspect. I felt that I had kind of grasped at least enough what drove the stock market, what market psychology was all about, what business and finance were all about. And then I wanted to get more creative with it. And that is when I started at Morning Brew, writing the Morning Brew newsletter, which at the time when I started as employee number 5 of the company, there were only about, I think, 200,000 subscribers. Today, they're closer to 4 million subscribers. But that was a fantastic experience, and just allowing myself to be creative. And without that experience, I don't think that I would be where I am today, because I got to understand that there's a lot of ways to tell important stories. It doesn't just have to be the headline. You can explore things, you can understand things in a way that is accessible for people, but is also engaging and sometimes even fun and optimistic. It doesn't necessarily have to be traditional news that gives people the information they need to be well-informed citizens. And that was kind of what set me on this track that I'm on now. But I guess that's kind of the origin story. And then we can get more into what has come after Morning Brew whenever you want to.
Yeah. No, I was interested in going a bit deeper in kind of what made you so passionate about journalism, because you mentioned storytelling a lot when you're talking about journalism, and I'm sure not everyone has the same view about journalism. And also kind of this balance between kind of entertainment and information, or kind of so in the beginning, when you kind of realized that you wanted to be a journalist, how did you imagine that future? Was it like a news anchor from like a TV? It was like the investigative journalism?
Yeah, initially I thought that I would be an anchor on television. That was always my ambition. And in college, it's actually what my focus was. You could kind of pick with my major. I ended up being a business journalism major, but you could kind of pick what you wanted to do, whether that was writing for the web, writing for, and I'm aging myself here, writing for a newspaper, which very few people chose to do, or broadcast. And I just loved broadcast. My school actually was, again, such a small town. There was no local television station in the town, or even in the greater county where I went to college. And so the college took up the mantle as the, effectively the TV news broadcast station for Rockbridge County, Virginia. And so for all 4 years of my college experience, every Tuesday and Thursday, I was on air giving people local news. And I loved it. I loved doing it. It was so much fun to produce a television broadcast, to anchor a television broadcast, to be a reporter. I got to really have all of those jobs all while I was in college, which was incredible and something I'm grateful for every single day. But that being said, when it came time to graduate from college, my 2 job options at the time were either to take the job in New York City as a stock market reporter for The Street, which is Jim Cramer's company, or my other option was to move to Tupelo, Mississippi to be a weekend news anchor. And I just, I again, loved business. I felt like that was where my heart really was. And while it would have been, I'm sure, an incredible experience to live in Tupelo, Mississippi for the first couple of years after graduation, I just saw myself in more of an urban setting. Yeah. And so that's why I chose New York.
And coming back to that idea of kind of entertainment versus information, kind of what, in your view, is kind of the mission and the role of journalism, and how much do you think kind of either kind of entertainment or making things more entertaining and easier to digest is important kind of to get important information across? You mentioned that example, which is kind of giving it very concrete examples on how abstract stuff impacts day to day. I didn't study journalism, so I only know journalism from the outside, but
right.
Tell me a bit about kind of your view or kind of on the role of journalism and how you personally kind of do you see kind of the mission of journalism and how you try to achieve it?
Happily. I love talking about this. I think that to me, one of the most important lessons that I learned in getting a journalism degree was that journalists have a different relationship with truth than everyday people do. For most everyday people, your relationship with truth is that you just try to tell the truth when you can. It's something that we appreciate and we, revere in society as a truthful person. When you're a journalist, your relationship with the truth changes and you don't just become a truth teller, you have to be a truth seeker. And that I think is a key differentiating factor when it comes to determining what journalism is, because we're not doing ourselves any favors when we have such stringent and like singular ideas of what a journalist is. A journalist is not just somebody who sits in front of a computer all day and just bangs out headlines and tries to be the first to be every other media publication and every other newsroom. A journalist is not just any of the characters from All the President's Men or the Boston Globe reporters who broke the story of the Catholic Church. Like the idea of who a journalist is and what they do is incredibly dynamic. It changes from person to person, from newsroom to newsroom, from media to media. And I think that that's a really important factor to keep in mind here. I think, though, that the key thing that every one of those people has in common, every single idea of a journalist in theory and in practice, is that you have to seek the truth. How you decide to do that, it can be up to you. It can be up to the mission of where you work or what you're doing as a singular individual. You don't have to have a degree to do it. You don't have to be formally trained to do it. But if you are somebody who is going out into a complicated world, attempting to seek the truth, to then share that truth with the masses, that to me is journalism. And I think that with the advent of all kinds of, what I even do today, content creation and social media and influencers, and people like Joe Rogan or Alex Cooper, in some ways, those people are engaging in journalism. It becomes problematic when they engage in journalism without taking on the responsibility that comes with being a journalist. When you become that kind of person who is seeking the truth, you owe the people who are consuming your content a certain degree of care. And I think in some regards that's missing from more modern interpretations of journalism. There's very little fact checking. There's very little care for trying to be as objective as possible. But I think as long as you're transparent with an audience and saying, this is what I have found, this is how it has shaped my view of the world, and I'm sharing with you very clearly that this is my personal opinion, right? Like that to me is okay. It doesn't necessarily make the journalism that you're engaging in a moot point, but I think it's an important aspect of sharing information that we don't pay enough attention to right now. But kind of all that being said, it doesn't all look the same, I think is probably the biggest takeaway. There is a saying in the news world that you're never going to beat a Bloomberg terminal. And that was always the goal when I was in breaking news, was to try to beat the Bloomberg terminal. The Bloomberg terminal is a computer, right? Like, yes, there are people who are writing these stories, but a lot of it is driven by technology. And I interned at Bloomberg. I spent a summer being the Bloomberg terminal, writing the headlines. And it was an illuminating experience, because you realize that this doesn't just happen on its own. The idea of being the authority for breaking news, especially in the business world, takes a lot of investment. It takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of computer power. There's like AI behind all of it. And that is not something that you're going to be able to replicate. But just because I'm not going to beat a Bloomberg terminal with a headline or a breaking story doesn't mean that the work that I'm doing is not valid. And I think that was a big lesson that I had to learn recovering from working in a breaking news environment when I went to Morning Brew, was that there's still value in curation. There's value in analysis. That's still journalism. It might not look like our traditional interpretation of journalism, but it doesn't make it any less important.
Yeah, I love kind of your take and kind of this kind of nugget that journalism is seeking the truth, and helps kind of to frame all these new kinds of journalism that you mentioned, kind of for solo creators and people like you mentioned that are doing this job of seeking the truth and giving their personal take on it, and yeah, actually helping kind of inform more and more people. Because I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking a bit, because the journalism was more about like a method in the process. It's being a journalist decades or years ago was kind of doing this. You do things in these steps, and then it comes out good journalism on the other side. But you can see that nowadays there's a lot of different ways of kind of achieving that mission of seeking the truth and kind of informing people. And yeah, thank you for that to help me kind of frame things a lot better. But yeah, now I'm curious, kind of focusing, and thank you kind of for this, sharing all these kind of takes in about journalism. I mean, you've been thinking about this for years, but now let's focus a bit on kind of your career, because you went from kind of the traditional side of journalism, kind of slowly into kind of more modern ways of storytelling, kind of from Bloomberg and business journalism to Morning Brew, which is a completely different format from the typical ones, and now kind of doing your own podcast. Thinking is cool. Yeah, walk us through kind of those moments. What made you think that was time to kind of to change? How did you kind of decide? Walk us through kind of those moments of change in your career. Because I mean, you mentioned in the beginning that that's kind of part of your identity, right? Kind of changing and always evolving.
Yes. I think that I've joked with my friends and family that with every job that I take, I get farther away from what I thought I would do when I was a child, imagining what my grown-up self would be like. And that has been such an incredible gift, because I have seen, especially over the last 5 or so years since I graduated college, there are so many more paths than they tell you when you're in school, when you're trying to decide what you want to do when you grow up. You don't have to decide when you're 18. You don't have to decide when you're 22, when you're graduating school. Like what you really need to do is commit yourself to being somebody who's open to opportunities. And that has been the greatest, I think, attribute that has helped me to see what the world could look like for me, how it could open up for me, is just taking risks when appropriate. When I was working in at the street as a breaking news reporter, mostly like only covering the stock market, I would write feature stories here and there, but for the most part, I was just doing breaking news and talking about market moves. Tesla stock is up 2%, Tesla stock is down 2%. And it just became so monotonous. I remember one day I published 21 stories in one day. And I was just thinking, who was reading these? There were people reading them. We had the data to suggest that these were still valuable to people, but I just got a little frustrated with, in all honesty, shouting into the void in trying to be the first, not the best. And that was really, really frustrating for me. And I decided that I wanted to pursue something that would allow me to be a little bit more creative and to bring more of my personality and myself into what I was writing. I've always loved the writing part of being a journalist. It's always kind of been, people always joke you're either a writer or you're a reporter when you work in journalism. Some people love to go out, and we call it scuffing your shoes in the journalism world. People love to go out and scuff your shoes and interview sources and hunt down information and try to find all these missing documents. And other people prefer the writing part. And I was always one of those people who preferred the writing part to the reporting part. So I thought, well, I can try to make a career out of that. And I had been a subscriber to Morning Brew since my college days, and they actually just sent me a cold LinkedIn request. I think actually after they hired me, they joked they sent it to about 250 people, but I was just one who responded. I got a LinkedIn message from one of the co-founders asking if I was interested in any new opportunities. I had kind of just made the decision for myself that I was. I went in and met with the team at Morning Brew. At the time, it was only 4 people, all men in their 20s, and me. And I was, the first woman, 23 years old, and was like probably in over my head, but had such a blast. I didn't really recognize that I was shifting gears to working for a startup. I think this, and I lucked out. Definitely. But I think that at the time, I probably didn't ask as many questions as I should when you decide that you're going to quit a traditional newsroom and go work for a startup. But it was, something that worked for me, and I loved doing it. When I started there, like I mentioned, I was employee number 5. Most of my days were just spent responding to readers in the inbox, because we were very big on creating that one-to-one relationship with early subscribers to the newsletter, and writing the newsletter itself every single day, Sunday through Friday. So it was a lot of work. There were only 2 writers. It was me and Neil Fryman. Neil is now the managing editor, and an incredible talent, has taught me so much about writing and about comedy. He's incredibly funny. But that was kind of the day-to-day, was just writing the newsletter day in, day out for about a year and a half. After that time, the guys at Morning Brew, the two co-founders, sat me down and said, we are ready to go multimedia. We want to start a podcast. When you were in your interview, told us that you studied broadcast in college. You're the only person here with a journalism degree. So we are going to task you with figuring out what this podcast should look like. I spent the entire summer of 2019 trying to figure out what the podcast could be, what it should be, what need there was in the market, what we specifically as Morning Brew could bring to the table. And I came up with this concept for a show that was interview-based, talking to big people about big topics in a way that felt really accessible, with kind of that youthful angle of people who are just trying to understand the world around them a bit better. And I just presented the show on a platter basically, and they were like, okay, why don't you just host it? And so I did. And it was the most pivotal moment, I think, in my entire career was that meeting where they said, why don't you host it? And since then, I have been doing podcasts like pretty much every week since 2019. And it's been an absolute incredible journey so far and continues to be. But that was really what kind of set me off obviously going to Morning Brew, working for a media startup was very different from what I expected my career to look like. But then going into podcasting after being a writer for so many years was a big shift. And I had certainly a learning curve, and there was a lot to be figured out as I was doing that. But I got to experience the value of understanding that not all journalism is the same, like I was talking about before, but especially that not all media are the same, that what I could do in a podcast, what I could do in a conversation with somebody was incredible. And it had this utility that just writing, which I love to do, like I mentioned, just writing couldn't quite do. That there is that human element when you hear two people in conversation that is so important and really resonates with people in a big way. And so that was how the podcast started. And that's how I got into podcasting. It was obviously circumstantial, a lot of luck in all honesty, but it was a great experience. And I did that for about a year and a half, and then decided that it was time to pursue a different career, and to pursue independence more than anything. And so that's when I quit I quit Morning Brew in March of 2021. So about a year ago.
Yeah, again, I loved another take of yours that you said that there are so many more paths than you think. And I mean, I think this has been like a recurring theme in the episodes of this season. So most people or people that end up being kind of successful, usually they say yes to most kind of career changes and opportunities, like by default. And like you mentioned, you even said yes to Morning Brew without maybe doing like the the due diligence or asking the question that you should. But I mean, what I've learned is that most of the times saying yes to careers changing brings you a lot more good things than negative things, even if it's not the right move. One thing that we often see a lot is kind of, it's okay to do kind of wrong career changes, but at least you understand what you don't like to do, and understanding what you're not good at doing or what doesn't motivate you or doesn't make you passionate. It's probably a good learning and a good thing to know that you don't want to go that way. So, but you need to try it, and that will make it, I think, more clear, much more obvious what it is that you want and that you should pursue. So yeah, I think that common thing about testing kind of what your career should be often, and kind of testing it and changing it and experimenting other stuff and saying yes almost by default, usually ends up with at least good learnings.
Yeah. And I think there's also something to be said for recognizing the season of life that you're in when these opportunities come to you. In the case of deciding to go work for Morning Brew, I was at the time 23 years old. I had pretty much no responsibilities other than feeding myself and paying my rent. And I could take a chance. And I think that was a huge part of being open to this opportunity, was that I had the ability to take a chance. And same thing with leaving Morning Brew. I don't ever want to neglect the reality of the situation. Was Morning Brew got bought. I made a small amount of money. I did not have enough equity, but I made a small amount of money. And I could afford to not bring in a paycheck for a couple of weeks and I would still be okay. I would still be able to live my life normally. I don't have children. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have any student debt. All of those things were factors that enabled me to take a chance. And I want to make the most of this part of my life, my 20s especially, that I don't have responsibilities really. You know, everybody has them here and there, but for the most part, this is the season of my life when I can take the most risk. And so I want to make the most of that. And I want to say yes to as much as I can. And I want to take on all sorts of opportunities that I never saw coming, because who knows, in 10 years, I might have kids and a mortgage and like a school tuition to pay. And so I want to make the most of it while I can.
Yeah, it makes sense. Kind of in this kind of you're right, but kind of I assume that because I know our audience is mainly, I think, in this season of life, and I think it's another reason for you to do this early, so that you kind of test the different paths, and then you find what it is the right path for you. So when you do need to kind of to stabilize, so to speak, and find kind of something more stable, you already know what makes you happy, and you can settle
Absolutely.
with that. Otherwise, you might need to settle with something that you don't like.
Yeah. I would rather commit a career to doing something that I like than something that I'm just okay with.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, let's move on to kind of to the next episode of your career. So moving from Morning Brew and kind of going independent, like you mentioned. Also, kind of that transition of going from or seeing yourself as a writing journalist to like a multimedia one, kind of podcasting. You still write, of course, and kind of the basis of your podcast is still kind of, there's, I'm sure, a lot of writing behind that, but exploring different formats. So tell us a bit kind of, what did you learn kind of with that change, or doing your journalism with different methods with podcasting? What have you learned with like 3 years of podcasting until now?
Sure. So I'll walk you through the timeline quickly and then give some of the big picture takeaways, because I think it's important to go in that direction. So I had worked at Morning Brew for about 2.5 years by the time it got sold. Insider bought a majority stake in the company. That inevitably, as it always does with startups, brought a lot of turnover, a lot of uncertainty that eventually, evened out. But I was one of those people who decided that my time with the company had come up, and obviously incredibly grateful for the experience that I had there, but I was just ready for something new. And I think at the core of that decision to pursue something new was the idea of seeking ownership. I had worked really, really hard on building a podcast that I was really, really proud of, that was very much tethered to my own personal brand, that I had been very careful in developing. And at the end of the day, I didn't own it. That is just the nature of the media business. And I got a little frustrated with that, but realized that these were just the circumstances that I had accepted when I decided to work for a company instead of working for myself. And so I was like, okay, then I'm going to go work for myself. And so in March of 2021, I left Morning Brew. And then in May of 2021, I launched Thinking is Cool, which is the podcast that I started with the help of Josh Kaplan, who was one of the first business hires at Morning Brew. He was there every step of the way in building the podcast at Morning Brew. We effectively built it together. He left around the same time that I did and was incredibly helpful in starting Thinking is Cool, from ideation to operations to, I don't know, forming an LLC, like all of the things that I didn't want to do because all I wanted to do was make podcasts, Josh handled. And that eventually led to the founding of Smooth Operations and Creator Services, which is the company that we founded in August of 2021. So it was a very busy summer last summer. Started the podcast in May, did a season of that, started Smooth Ops in August. And essentially Smooth Ops is just shipping out Josh in a nutshell, creating a means for creators themselves to scale their own media businesses and be the CEOs of those media businesses. So we work with partners to handle their operations, to handle their advertising, to handle whatever they need us to on a pretty bespoke basis, so that they can focus on creating content and building out their community in a way that is scalable, which is often the problem that creators come up against. It's really difficult to scale when you're a team of one. So we come in and help these people effectively do the work of more than just a team of one while still retaining ownership over their own business. And so that was that summer. It was pretty busy. Obviously, we had a lot going on. And then luckily, right around when we launched Smooth Ops, we brought in Jenny Rothenberg, who was also an early Morning Brew. We all kind of came in around the same time. Jenny ran growth at Morning Brew and is this incredible operations mind. She's seriously the most productive person I have ever met in my life. So Jenny, Josh, and I are the co-founders of Smooth Ops. That's most of their day-to-day is focusing on the clients that we have with Smooth Ops. Most of my time day-to-day is focused on Thinking is Cool, which is, and I know this is confusing. I wish I had a Venn diagram or something to write here, but Thinking is Cool, my media company, is a client of Smooth Operations, which is kind of the management company. And so most of my time still today is spent on making Thinking is Cool. The show itself has evolved a ton in the year since I launched it. When I first started, I think that in some ways I just was eager to try anything new. And so I got away from more of the business content that I really, really loved, the business and finance and startup stuff that I had spent my entire career at that point covering. I wanted to just talk about something else. Like, I think I was just so burned out on that part of the world that I wanted to talk about something else. And so I took on these big picture ideas. Every single week I was doing episodes about like, how do we solve climate change? What are the future of political parties? Like really, really big ideas that were complicated, but that was kind of the point, that I wanted people to recognize that you can understand a complicated topic and that you can explore it yourself. And that was always the goal, was to create conversations for people. The tagline was, we want to make your next conversation better than your last. And that is still at the very center of, it's kind of like what Thinking is Cool is rooted in, is getting people to have conversations and getting people to engage in conversations that might challenge us, that might make us change our minds, that might reaffirm us in what we already believe in. But at the core, it's just getting people to talk to each other. And so that's how it started. I did 2 seasons of that and then decided to take a little bit of a break. I was a little burned out. And the season format was really tough for me because it was just not what I was used to. And 10 weeks, and usually the seasons were about 10 episodes long, 10 weeks of like really, really, really hard work every single week just became too much. So I decided to take a step back and think about, why was I doing what I was doing? Why was I making episodes that were like this? What was the motivation behind all of these decisions to create these episodes? And I'm lucky that I had the time and space to sit back and think about that, because this brings me to kind of the big picture takeaway post timeline. And I think a lot of it came down to understanding the motivations that I had early in creating Thinking is Cool. My motivations were primarily driven by adrenaline, and I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I just wanted to be successful because I wanted to prove that I could do this on my own. And so I was just like basically like blacked out that entire summer, just like head down working, making these episodes. And then when I finally got a chance to sit back and take a breather, I realized that that's not a sustainable way of creating a content focused business. You have to have a motivation that's more than just, I want to prove people wrong, because that's not how you find content market fit. I had to create content that was sustainable for me, content that an audience wanted to consume, and content that could scale in a way that made sense for what I wanted and what my goals were. And so with that in mind, I tried to kind of figure out what my next move was going to be. And I started to think a little bit more seriously about YouTube. I think in the early days, I did a podcast. I started Thinking is Cool as a podcast, mostly because that's what I knew how to do. I'd already built a podcast successfully and hosted a podcast successfully. I knew what mistakes I had already made that I could avoid. And this was just something that felt familiar. But at the end of the day, growing a podcast is really, really hard, as I'm sure you've probably experienced. I wanted to participate in an algorithmic feed. And that's just, at the end of the day, how you grow today is putting your stuff on something that's algorithmic, something that can recommend content to people. And so I decided to focus more of my time on YouTube. And so that's what I've been doing for most of the spring and summer of this year so far. Still creating podcasts, but focus more on creating content that is a little bit more tailored to YouTube and short form on YouTube and TikTok as well. But also getting back to what I actually like to do, which is interviewing people, it's why it's so weird to be interviewed myself. That's always kind of been the constant in my career that I feel really comfortable doing, that I could kind of just, it comes naturally to me. And I'm really, really grateful for that. I think that the idea of being a quote unquote thought leader and trying to get people to have these conversations by only seeking information in an inward way, that just wasn't sustainable for me. I'm somebody who thrives more when I go outward. I feel like I have better ideas. Obviously, I consume more information. I get more points of view when I'm talking to more people. And so I decided to just do that. Like there's a reason that it feels good. There's a reason that I finish an interview and I think like, I can't wait to publish this. And I hadn't really had that with any of the content that I was creating before. So that's why I got back into interviewing. And it's been great so far. I try to do one interview and one piece of like, I guess like the good example that I recently did was a short video on the formula shortage in the US, followed by an interview with a founder of a company that is attempting to solve for some of the problems in the formula industry in the United States. So that's kind of the format is here's a big issue. I'm going to talk to an expert. And that's been working so far, but YouTube is tough to grow. I will admit, it's a little bit daunting to get into YouTube this late in the game. It's obviously been around for quite some time, but it's been really fun. And to add in the layer of editing and like editorializing that I didn't get to do in a podcast that I can do when I'm, having fun and like messing around in a YouTube video. It's been really gratifying. So that's what my focus has been more recently. And I think that the motivations are more in line with something that's sustainable. I'm doing this because I love to do it. And I'm doing this because people enjoy hearing two other people in conversation. And I think that it'll pay off.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I heard a few of your episodes, and that was actually something I was curious about, kind of this difference, because usually podcasts are conversations, so there's more than one people. So I was curious to know about kind of the monologue format and how that worked out for you, and kind of this difference between, because questioning yourself is probably harder than just questioning others. So, and I think like the work that you did was mostly like that work of questioning yourself and then going deeper on those topics, and then, trying to inform people and put your own take on them.
I think in the early days, the format was, I attempted to kind of do a mixed format where I would include snippets of an interview. Yeah. I would do many interviews for the episodes, and I would record them and include kind of sound bites from people that were, informed how I approach the issue. But it was really just, I'm going to explore this, come along on the ride with me as I do. And then I eventually realized that this was basically every week I was writing a 13-page story. They were like 10,000 words, on a specific issue that ended up looking like a piece that would be in like the Atlantic or the New Yorker, that people spend weeks, if not months, reporting out. And I just felt like I wasn't necessarily, first of all, that's just really, really hard to do every week, week in and week out. But second of all, I wasn't doing justice to the stories themselves when I only had a week to make these episodes. It just, it left so much on the table when it's just one person and you don't have the option to interview 20 people. You only have the option to interview maybe 2 to 5. And so I wanted to better honor the fact that people were coming to think and to think through something with me. And I think that the interview is a better format for that. I can accept, I think, in an interview format that I'm not going to get to everything. And the people who are listening to the show and watching the show on YouTube can accept that with me. And that to me feels a lot better than trying to, write like a crazy long piece every single week that is never quite as good as it could be if I just had a little bit more time.
Yeah, but I mean, this relates to what we were saying a while back of kind of experimenting stuff. And then you realize kind of what's not sustainable or what doesn't work. And that probably made you realize how did you enjoy doing interviews by not doing them. But yeah, tell us, I'm curious, you have a lot of interesting episodes and topics on Thinking is Cool. What would be kind of the 2 or 3 you would recommend for someone to listen as the first ones, or which are your favorite ones?
Yeah, I think from, the show has evolved obviously over the last year in several ways. I think from what I consider Thinking is Cool version 1, which were those longer, like 45-minute episodes that were mostly just me talking into a microphone with, after having done some reporting. I really, really liked I guess the first episode is actually something I'm really proud of. I think that it says a lot about the goals of the show itself. It was about the porn industry, about making porn suck less. And I think it's just like, I don't know, something I still look back on today and I'm really proud of. A lot from the first season, I'm really, really proud of. I think those were obviously first season episodes for a reason. They were some of my better ideas. I liked that one. I really liked the climate change episode. There's an episode that was actually, and this is the one I probably hear about the most from people in that version 1 kind of version of the show, an episode that I made with the company Fundrise. It was a sponsored episode, but I was very adamant from the very beginning of the show that even for sponsored episodes, it had to be something that I would want to make on my own independently. I'll come up with an idea. If we find a partner that fits with this idea, then they can sponsor it. But it was an episode about buying homes, especially for millennials and Gen Z. Will you ever be able to afford your own home? And I hear a lot from people about that one because it's a universal experience. Unfortunately, this fear that I'm never going to own real estate. And I unpacked a lot of why that's a fear in the first place, why it might feel totally untenable to ever own a home, but also why we equate, being an adult or being a successful person with owning a piece of property. So that was a fun one. And I think in, the more recent months, I really liked this, like I mentioned it just a moment ago, the formula episodes. And I have done a lot of work kind of exploring this concept of champagne socialism that I'm really into. I think those were some of my more fun interviews and videos that I did. And those are on my YouTube as well. But, it's hard to say like, go back and listen from the beginning because the show has changed so much. Yeah. But I think that maybe it would be kind of fun for me personally to go back and listen from episode 1 because you can kind of track this evolution of somebody who's like, just like crazy energetic in the very beginning, kind of evens out towards season 2, takes a pretty bad dip in like the winter of 2021, 2022, and then is kind of getting my footing again now, which is kind of where I am. And I think that it's natural to have that evolution happen. It's certainly interesting as a content creator to have that evolution happen publicly. Most people go through ebbs and flows in creativity. Not all people go through ebbs and flows in creativity in a very public forum, but that is what I do.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of kind of the last big topic I want to dive a little bit deeper is, of course, smooth ops and like how this role of being an operator can be kind of the missing piece in the creator economy. And yeah, I love kind of the thesis and the basis behind the smooth ops. And you were just mentioning kind of how hard it is to be a solo creator. So not only kind of the pressure of putting out episodes weekly, but dealing with kind of moments when you have lower energy, when you have crappy ideas, when kind of stuff doesn't it's harder. And when you're a team of 1, like you mentioned, that can be a lot of pressure. So I think that's kind of number 1 problem that you can speak us a little bit more about it, kind of that feeling of pressure. And of course that it ends up not being sustainable, and then people eventually burned out and then they just stop doing it. And I think kind of what you're trying to do or help creators do with smooth ops, making scalability and sustainability possible for creators is super interesting. But yeah, tell us a little bit, kind of going from your own experience, kind of feeling that pressure and that, those difficulties and how you're trying to solve that with the smooth ops model.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident in saying that if it had not been for Josh and Jenny and the Smooth Ops team, that I would not still be doing this. I would have completely burned out to the point of total unrecoverability, if not for the fact that I had a team. Doing anything by yourself is always difficult. And I don't want to twist the interpretation of what I do. I am an independent creator. My editorial team is 1, but I do have the backing of a group of people who are incredibly bright and intelligent and supportive, who can help me, who can say, like, what do you want to do? Josh and Jenny and I were the ones who decided that I should start doing YouTube because we were at brunch one day and we were talking about the fact that I missed being in front of a camera. And so we were like, all right, well, let's just try YouTube. And so I did, and it's been pretty great so far. But I really do feel that I would not still be doing this if I had to do it totally by myself. And so with Smooth Ops, it's not necessarily that I have a team of people who are coming in and saying, I'm going to edit your video, or I'm going to, like, post something on YouTube on your behalf, right? Like, I still do all of that myself, but I have people who are in my corner who are fighting to help me become the best version of myself as a creator that I can be. What that entails changes, quite honestly, week to week. Some weeks it's, let me negotiate this contract with a brand partnership for you. Some weeks it's, let's have a big picture, 30,000 foot. What is the direction of your content right now? And who is your audience? And how can we morph that to be where we want it to be? Sometimes it's just, like, how are you feeling? Are you tired? Are you feeling uncreative? What can I do to help you? And that is so invaluable to me and all of the other clients with Smooth Ops. It's obviously different because I'm a client and a co-founder of the company. So my relationship with the team at Smooth Ops is a little different from our other clients, but I really do. And I know that people say, like, it's bespoke about everything, but it really is. The roles that we take on for the clients we work with differ from person to person, from project to project. But the main driving force behind Smooth Ops is this recognition that it's really hard to do something by yourself. Time is our only finite resource at the end of the day, and creator burnout is real. We have to do everything we can to stop that from happening. And people want to be successful. If you have decided to create a community around a specific kind of content that you're making, obviously success has probably factored into that decision. You're not just doing it because it's fun. Like, it's really hard to be an independent creator. You're doing it for a reason. You're doing it because a community needs you, and you're doing it because you want to succeed. And so our goal is to recognize that the biggest limiting factor is that creators' creativity and their time. So what can we create for these people that will help them to scale beyond just themselves? So one example of a client we work with, we started working with Colin and Samir, who are YouTubers first. They started out as YouTubers covering the creator economy, the business of creators, many years ago on YouTube. They've been creating in all sorts of ways, shapes, and forms for many years now. They really hit their stride in the last about year and a half, covering the creator economy as it has exploded during that time, interviewing really successful creators about how they built their businesses. Colin and Samir were just absolutely cranking interviews and videos. They were doing such great work. They were getting incredible opportunities, but they just felt like they were at their limit. There's only so much time in the day. There's only so much they could create, but they wanted to keep scaling their business. And so we have helped them create a newsletter product called the Publish Press that is created in the ethos of the Colin and Samir YouTube channel, but is a separate entity, a separate media company that has a full-time writer. It's obviously very close with Colin and Samir. Their names are at the bottom. They are the editors. It's, we repurpose content from Colin and Samir for the Publish Press, but they don't have to write it every single day. They don't have to edit it every single day, but it's still part of their media ecosystem. It's still something that they have ownership in, and it's their business scaling without needing them hands-on every single step of the process. They were very hands-on, as they should be in the beginning of building out this newsletter, but we've helped it to get to a point now where it can scale without them. Like, they can just go make videos and interview people and do what they want. And the Published Press is still going to keep churning and going out 3 times a week. And that, I think, is a great example of the utility of Smooth Ops is recognizing that every creator's journey is very different, as it should be. And we want to be there to help you get to a point where you don't have to have your hands on every single thing every single day, that you can be the CEO of a media company that is kind of made in your image, but not necessarily by you, hands-on all the time. And so Colin and Samir are obviously farther along in their journey as creators than I am with Thinking is Cool, but that's kind of the goal with Thinking is Cool as well. Eventually I'll get to a point where I've got this great community and I want to scale and I don't know how to do it, or I need help, or I don't have enough time. And Smooth Ops will be there to help me figure out what that next step looks like.
Yeah, makes total sense. One question, so for people that are kind of probably like a step or two before you or kind of a Smooth Ops client, what would be kind of your advice for people on kind of changing their mindset from solo creators to like media business CEOs, like you mentioned? So it has a lot to do with kind of changing your mindset. So looking at the content that you make as a media company and not just you as a solo creator. What do you think are kind of some first steps into kind of making that transition and seeing yourself as a company and a business that can scale beyond you and just like doing content yourself?
Yeah, I think it requires a very heavy dose of self-awareness. A lot of people will say that they want to be an influencer or they want to be a content creator because they think it's a really easy job. Especially, I see this all the time with people who want to be lifestyle or fashion influencers. You get to go on all these trips and get free clothes and free shoes and blah, blah, blah. But it's incredibly hard. And there is an incredibly competitive world that creators operate in. You have to be self-aware and recognize that you cannot become a media business if you're just replicating the success of somebody else. That doesn't work in the business world, and it's not going to work for creators. You can't just, pass off a product that somebody else is creating as your own. You have to offer some sort of creativity to it. You have to offer something that's unique, that is not currently on the market. And that's something I've had to remind myself of constantly. It's not a new format to interview people. It's certainly not new, but my hope is that my approach to these interviews is what's new. My honesty, my transparency, my content that goes along with these interviews, that's what's new. You can use formats that work, but you have to be totally yourself, and that version of yourself can't already exist. I think that is the first step, is recognizing, number one, that this is tough work. And number two, that it's tough work for a reason. Like, it can be really successful. It can be really great as long as you are honest with yourself and that you're bringing something to the table that's not already there. So that would be my first piece of advice. Creativity is boundless. There are tons of ways to find it. There's tons of ways to stoke it when you feel like you're lacking creativity. It just kind of depends on what works for you, but you have to recognize that you can't just go out and become a content creator. Like, you really have to work for it. For some people, that means doing it as a side hustle. I was lucky enough that I got to be kind of a content creator with a salary and then quit and do it myself pretty immediately. But I think that it's that self-awareness that is really what matters. But also this is perhaps a little bit more inside baseball, but it's really difficult to create content for a general audience. And I say that as somebody who does it. My audience is pretty much like whoever. Like, there's not really a specific niche to the content that I create, which is incredibly tough. And at Smooth Ops, I'm the only creator who is in that position. Everybody else we work only with people who are creating for a niche community of consumers. For Colin and Samir, that is the creator economy. We work with Kevin Ting from Coinsider, who covers crypto. We work with Dan Runcie, who from Trapital, who covers like the business of music and hip hop. These specific industries are so much more fruitful and so much easier to gain traction in than just creating for everybody. So my number one piece of advice would be to know who your audience is and know who your audience could be and map how you get from one point to the next. I think that is super important, and something that's a lot harder to do when your audience is general, and a lot easier to do when it's, a specific cohort of people. So yeah, that's kind of the businessy advice that I would give. But the more general advice is just to be as honest with yourself as you can, and to recognize that something might not be working. That has obviously happened to me many times, but I've been lucky that I can kind of switch it up and figure out what works next, or take a risk or take a next step. But that would not be possible without a little self-awareness and maybe a little bit of self-criticism here and there.
Yeah, but I think it kind of sounds obvious, kind of that the advice is self-awareness, but I think it's super important and powerful. And I think the first kind of question the creators should ask themselves is why they do it. So probably 99% of creators will be just like, will be a hobby. It will be something that they do because they have fun doing it. they will probably never make money out of it. And so just realizing that 99% of people will be not making money out of it, may kind of free yourself from that. And if you realize you just do it for your own sake because you have fun, I mean, it takes a lot of the pressure out. If you do decide do you want to do it more seriously? Do you want to have some sort of revenue coming from it? Then you do need to start thinking of yourself as a business and as a media business, and not the other way around. So kind of being that first self-awareness of, and then of course comes all of the advice that you gave. So if I am a media business, there's a lot of things that I should kind of think about, and before I just start recording videos or podcasts.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, like you said, most people might be in the first category, just making content for fun, but they have expectations to have revenue or become some of kind of their kind of idols or the people that they admire, without having that kind of business mindset, so to speak. And also, like you said, not even having a clue of how hard it is being a creator.
Yeah. And I don't want to come off as too pessimistic, because optimism is really a part of who I am, a trademark part of who I am. But it's just to say that, it's nothing worthwhile is easy. It can be said for any industry, but certainly when you're a creator and anybody can do it, I think is kind of the interesting aspect of this part of the economy. We all have phones for the most part. Like if you have a phone, you can be a creator, which is kind of crazy. It's not like you need this huge capital investment to pursue your dreams, if that's your dream. And so you can do it, like anybody can. I just think it would behoove people to have a little bit of a plan or a little bit of an idea of where you want to go and set goals for yourself, and realize that you probably won't meet them as quickly as you think you will. But as long as you are willing to put in the work, and also to recognize what you can and can't do, what you are really good at and what you suck at, that's incredibly important. And if you can recognize that early, it will put you on a much smoother path toward meeting those goals than the alternative.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, how hard that is to grow a podcast or YouTube, and of course, increasingly hard. And I mean, everyone that I talked about that has a semi-successful YouTube channel, like TikTok account or podcast, has been doing it for years and years. So there were years of almost no audience, because by chance of some episode that kind of grew exponentially. But most people had years of anonymity before, and was kind of much more kind of their resilience and keep doing them, and the consistency that kind of brought the and most people don't have that kind of resilience or patience. But yeah, so trying to kind of close this in a few kind of more I think the first question would be thinking of people that might be thinking of starting a podcast, a YouTube channel, and might think the same things we discussed. I mean, it's a super competitive area, very difficult to grow. So when or why do you think someone should start creating content?
I think you should start creating content if you feel like you have something to say. And that's not to say that every thought that crosses through your head is worth sharing with the world, but certainly it's not the case in my own mind. But I think that everybody has something that makes them unique and that they can bring to the table that nobody else can. And if you have the means and the motivation to share that with the world, then like, why not? It's so easy to pick up your phone and make a 60-second TikTok. It really is. And if you want to try it out, try it out. Maybe it doesn't succeed. Maybe you talk to nobody for a couple of weeks, but I have a friend who is a freelance reporter. She works a lot for Teen Vogue. She does a lot of feature stories for Teen Vogue, but works kind of all over the place doing really, really interesting feature length stories. And she, we had a conversation about TikTok one time. She started making TikToks and was kind of making them for like maybe a couple hundred views here and there for most of her videos. And she texted me this morning, and one of her videos had kind of gone viral overnight. She was at like 35,000 views or something. And it kind of finally all clicked. And she was like, wow, now I get it. Like now I get what I should be doing. Now I get what I should be saying. Now I understand why people were so engaged with this versus not very engaged with the first 10 or 20 videos that I made on my TikTok. And all it took was just refining her approach and figuring out what was working for her and for her audience and what wasn't. And she finally got there. And it was really cool to see that excitement, because it does feel really good when something that you're saying is resonating with people, especially when you're bearing part of who you are, or bearing part of your soul. It feels really good when people say like, hey, yeah, even if it's funny, like, hey, that made me laugh. Or if it's serious, hey, that made me think. That is a really fantastic feeling that, it's not out of reach for anybody who wants to start creating content. So I would say just start. To your point, recognize that it's probably going to be tough in the beginning stages. It's certainly a humbling experience to make I have a fairly successful podcast in terms of the downloads. Like I do pretty well with the podcast. With the YouTube, however, it's a slow process, like it sucks to pour your heart and soul into something that only like 150 people are going to watch. I'm lucky that I also have like a couple thousand people who are going to listen on a podcast, but just be ready for, the hard work that comes in the beginning, because it doesn't happen overnight. Anybody who is considered a success will tell you that overnight success takes about 10 years, but it's worth it. It's a fun thing to do. It's a fun community to be a part of. I was, having coffee with a journalist friend yesterday who writes a newsletter, and we were talking about the experience of being a newsletter writer versus the experience of being independent, especially in a post-COVID world. I was like, my life is pretty easy. Like I work hard and I try to make good content, but for the most part, like I'm chilling. I'm having a good time. I'm doing what I love. And that is an incredible, incredible opportunity that I'm crazy grateful for. And it can be really fun to do it. So I guess that's the advice to people is just start. If it's something you're interested in, just give it a try. Like, why not? You have nothing to lose. Don't think about posting on the internet as like, what if my friends see it? Think about like, what if my friends don't see it? Like that should be what motivates you more.
And even in thinking about numbers, and you were talking about only 150 people see my YouTube video, and that, I mean, we nowadays we look at those just as numbers and we compare them to other videos. But just imagine yourself being in the room with 150 people listening to what you have to say.
Such a good point. Yeah, it's crazy. Like our perception of success versus failure is obviously skewed by the internet, but that is an incredibly good point that I'm going to write down. Yeah. Imagine if you could just sit down 150 people and tell them what you think about the NRA, which is the video I'm making today. Like that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. So last question. And since, you added one word to your kind of group of words that describe you, which was optimistic. So it's optimistic question to end our conversation today, which is, why do you think the future is bright for content creators like you and all of the cases that we discussed today?
So on a business level, like on a logistical level, I think that the future is bright because never before have there been so many tools, and especially free or very inexpensive tools, for people to scale their businesses as content creators. It's a lot easier today than it used to be to have ownership over the content that you're creating, and to recognize that content brings value to people, but also to call and help when you need it, to use these tools to your advantage without really having to pay a lot. Creating a content business is virtually, like zero capital that you need. Like I have a fancy mic, but like, I don't really need it. I could do it all on my phone. As long as I have Wi-Fi, I can pretty much run my business. And that's a really freeing concept. So I think in some ways that is what gives me a lot of optimism, is that compared to how we used to interpret what starting a business quote meant, starting a content creation business or a media business is a lot easier than it used to be. You don't need a newsroom full of people. You don't need a physical space. All you need is a phone and good ideas. And that is really cool. I think in a bigger picture sense, I feel really optimistic for the future of creators and the creator economy the more I talk to people who are participants in it. Some of the smartest people I know have decided to pursue this line of work because it works better for what they want their lives to look like. And that idea of doing something, not because it's easy, but because it's going to get you where you want to be in a way that is still incredibly gratifying for you and that makes you feel good and is sustainable. that just makes people happy. Like that's a really great spot to be in. It's obviously a challenge to solve for creator burnout. The tools I mentioned help a lot with avoiding that, but the fact that people can own their own businesses at a much faster rate, and a larger proportion than they used to, is incredibly awesome. And I think is, sets up this generation of people who are participants in the creator economy, or even just consumers of the creator economy, sets us all up to live happier and more fulfilled lives in the future. There are obvious risks of sharing more than is normal about yourself online. It's, very tough to be like a public facing person all the time. But I think in some ways, the fact that so many people are doing it makes me optimistic for the future, because those people are living a life that is on their terms. And that's really, really awesome. I think is going to make for a happier cohort of this generation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kinsey, for ending on this note, and for your super interesting takes on journalism first, and then the creator economy next. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that other people will as well. And thank you for your optimism and your smile. People in the podcast I'm not seeing, but I appreciate talking with optimistic and curious people like you. So thank you for accepting the invitation.
Yeah.
And we will kind of put the links to Thinking is Cool and to Smooth Ops in the descriptions, of course, because I'm sure people will be curious to explore what you've been doing.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And great questions, a really fun conversation. If anybody wants to follow up with anything, you can also, my email is just kinsey@thinkingiscool.com. Follow me on TikTok or Instagram, or wherever, slide into the DMs. I would love to chat. I'm always down.
Yeah, thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Talent Protocol, the Web3 professional network where anyone can invest in high potential talent.